We're going to be diving into more of the product series here. We just had a great presentation about DEP and VPP, and to now take it over to the education side, we're going to talk all about Apple in the classroom. And to do that, we're going to bring up the product manager here for Apple Integrations, Michael Devins. Michael, welcome.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. I'll invite Sam up on stage later. Sam's on our education team to really help sort of drive some of these points home, but I'll get things kicked off here. We're talking about going all in the classroom, right? Of course, we'll discuss the tools, but more importantly, it's critical to understand the challenges that these tools are going to help you overcome, why they were created in the first place, what are some of the things you either are facing or haven't yet faced, and maybe how to think about approaching those. At the end of the day, when we think about this, it's really all about teacher effectiveness, student learning, that Apple classroom experience, and how we can create that for all of the users in our environment. And really, it's to this group to find the best ways to propose delivering on that experience. So before we go way in depth, I actually want to talk about Jamp Now for just a moment. With Jamp Now, really lightweight, really elegant solution to get into device management. I like to think about this as going from zero to zero touch in minutes. Jamp Now is a really simple way to get started, including getting access to deployment programs, a really compelling part of any deployment, especially when we talk about creating those experiences on behalf of users in the classrooms. So getting access to the device enrollment program, getting access to the zero-touch enrollment experience, and also taking advantage of apps and books deployments, being able to put apps on those devices in the classroom. Apps are what drive that rich learning experience, and Jamp Now can deploy those apps to those students and teacher devices to facilitate that experience. I also want to point out, for those of you that aren't aware, a recently added feature to Jamp Now, a feature called Teammates, where you can actually have multiple administrators, multiple teammates log in and interact with the service to deploy apps, to reset passwords, et cetera. A great enhancement in a number of use cases, including in education, where you might want multiple teachers or education techs or librarians to be able to get access to that. It's no longer limited to a single administrator. I'll talk about this more later, but there's actually some scenarios where Classroom app and Jamp Now for app deployment and the marrying of those two actually is a really elegant solution in the classroom, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. We continue to see pilots and small programs where they're deploying Apple in the classroom using Jamp Now, being able to help even those smaller deployments find success with these experiences. Of course, the primary solution that many of you may be using, many of our customers have been using over the last decade and a half, is Jamp Pro. This is really that tried and true solution for deploying Apple at scale in education. There's a big component of this that's lifecycle management, and in some ways, it's not even about the lifecycle of the devices themselves, which may have a 3-year or a 5-year life cycle, but in fact, for many cases in education, that life cycle resets every year, which is a lot more work than managing a multi-year refresh cycle. Zero-touch deployments obviously help minimize a lot of that friction, being able to do more with less. And also the huge emphasis with apps and books, being able to deploy all that content out, facilitating that classroom experience. Jamp Pro gives you the full capabilities there, whether that's pushing them directly to the devices, device assignments, no Apple ID required to get apps on those devices, to putting them into self-service and giving that custom curated app store experience for your staff, for your students. Some really compelling experiences there. And of course, Jamp Pro is where we deliver on this promise of fast followers of Apple, trying to ship sometimes even, usually, hopefully even before they do, being able to get that 0-day support out the door, because it's critical that all of those capabilities that you're using today continue to work, that you have the compatibility, and of course, the new capabilities that are added often are relevant to the educators. Also, just to mention, with version 10, that self-service experience is seeing some great enhancements. Speaking of 0-day, Apple's always moving the experience forward, adding those new capabilities, which means we need to keep up with that as well. And it used to be that 0-day was once a year. It's actually kind of twice a year now, as they've gotten into quite a cadence of a spring release and a fall release. But we went through this most recently. You went through this most recently with the 9.101 release. Apple doesn't wait for anybody. In many cases, schools are taking on Apple's fall releases, Jamp's fall releases to support them. And as I said, there's often some compelling education functionality, whether that's a new restriction to prevent students from creating a VPN to get around the network restrictions, or some new capabilities to further customize the classroom app experience. there's a lot of important stuff that often comes in these compatibility and new feature releases. Can make things stressful starting the year with this release, but it's a foundational piece, and we take that really seriously, that you count on us both for compatibility and enhancements, and we work hard so that you can be successful. Because you're dealing with a lot of things. You're not just dealing with Apple and with Jamp. There's the devices coming and going, apps and books being deployed daily, of course, staff, students, class rosters, all of that's changing. That's a lot to manage. And the great news is that over the last year and a half, Apple's showed us their vision of how to streamline and simplify those capabilities to address a lot of those challenges that have built up as Apple deployments have scaled in the classroom. And of course, I'm talking about Apple School Manager. So Apple School Manager is a tool that allows IT administrators to more easily manage the people, the devices, and the content in a central web-based portal. Just a show of hands, how many people are using Apple School Manager today? Cool. Hands on, how many people want to use Apple School Manager but are not yet using Apple School Manager? Cool. And how many people are like, what's Apple School Manager, or I'm not so sure about this? Oh, great, thanks for coming. So there are a handful of specific challenges that I want to talk through as it pertains to Apple School Manager and the things that Apple's trying to do to help Apple in the classroom, help you succeed with Apple in the classroom. So let's start with, at the top, with consolidated ownership. At the highest level, IT administrators, you're supporting the devices in your environment and the content in your environment. Let's start with devices, talk about some of the unique challenges there. With the launch of Apple School Manager, device management is now built right in. Not just the same DEP portal you knew before, there's actually some great enhancements. Of course, your existing servers will continue to work when you migrate to Apple School Manager. Creating new ones is just as easy. It's a single place to manage all your devices. And Jamp continues to integrate with that. And I mentioned before, just mere weeks ago, did anyone notice the new default device assignment capabilities inside of Apple School Manager? Saying iPads automatically assigned to this MDM server, Macs automatically assigned to that MDM server, Apple TVs automatically assigned to that MDM server. Some really nice enhancements, very cool capabilities, further streamlining the way that managing devices in education, the way that you can go through those processes in a really elegant fashion. Of course, DEP is great when all your devices are in there. Harder when they're not. Maybe your reseller didn't support it when you bought these devices a few years ago. Maybe you received some devices as a donation or purchased secondhand. That leaves sort of a gap in your deployment workflow, and you can't just say, we'll use DEP. I'm sure many of you were even more excited than we were at Jamp to see this new functionality added to Apple Configurator this fall, where you can actually, using Apple Configurator 2.5, add devices, both iOS 11 and tvOS devices, directly into Apple's device enrollment portal. Even better than, submit some form to some list. This is actually a really elegant way of putting the tools in your hands. Possession is 9/10 of the law, with some great safeguards there for making sure that everything is in fact institutionally owned, allowing you to get any of these iOS and tvOS devices into management with the device enrollment program. I mentioned a little bit of this in the last deployment session, showed some screenshots. I won't reiterate all of those. There's a 30-day provisional period where users are made aware that they're in that provisional period. They can leave management, and of course, supporting devices no matter how they were purchased. And a note about the new Apple TV 4K for all those that are being deployed out there. You do need to be on High Sierra using Apple Configurator 2.5 because sans USB, that configuration is now done wirelessly. So Apple Configurator 2 allows you to get all your devices in one place, and that one place is the device enrollment program. I mentioned that focus on end user privacy and security, especially in education. This is important, and so this is what it looks like on a device if they've been provisionally added to DEP. Going through that configurator workflow, you can see that they have the alert right there at the bottom of their lock screen that you can leave remote management and settings. And of course, if you go into settings, if this were straight DEP, I wouldn't have an option to leave. Because I'm in that provisional period, I have 30 days where I can leave remote management. This is important because if someone clicks this button, that device gets erased because it's no longer institutionally managed. The data needs to be secured. And also that serial number actually gets pulled out of the device enrollment program. So when you're thinking about how to use this tool to get devices added into DEP, think about doing it in the June, July timeframe, so by September they're fully baked. This option disappears after 30 days. Students no longer have the option to leave. If a device is wiped in that provisional period, there is still an option for them to skip, leave remote management. So make sure that those devices get properly assigned to a pre-stage in Jamp Pro. That MDM server is linked up, so if a device does get erased or wiped, it can come back in, because even though it's in a provisional state, you can still do the wipe re-enroll workflows here. And then after 30 days, that button goes away, the leave message goes away, first-class citizen within DEP. So it's important to understand the 30-day period. Really compelling functionality. There are a number of cases where devices maybe got inadvertently disowned or released. You want to get new devices in. There's no limitation to being able to remove and re-add those. So covered more in the other session if you want to learn more, but definitely something to take a look at. Now, before I check the box on consolidated ownership, because devices are only half of that story, we also need to talk about apps and books. Beyond the devices, the students and staff are leveraging the content you're deploying. That's really the rich learning experience in the classroom that we're supporting. So nearly every education customer that I talk to is using VPP in some way. And it allows you to easily deploy apps and books to staff and students. You just get them right up there in your one VPP token. You only have one VPP token. It's really consolidated in your one VPP token. I should open my bottle. It's not actually that simple as it relates to most customers. It's actually the case that they have many VPP tokens. And there are valid reasons for this. You might have different budget centers. You might have different school locations. And the world you live in is that you've got a lot of these tokens out there, a lot of accounts out there. It can lead to some challenges because it might be difficult to organize. Of course, if somebody leaves, you might lose access to that content altogether. It's not actually institutionally owned. It's somewhat individually owned, tied to that one VPP account. That content can go away. The good news is, as we've seen Apple preview upcoming functionality with apps and books moving properly into Apple School Manager, we're ready to support this within Jamp Pro. It's a really amazing enhancement for you as IT admins, being able to search, discover, purchase, deploy, transfer all of the content that you're using across all of your VPP tokens, getting them into one place within Apple School Manager. This will be an opt-in process. So you might be using Apple School Manager and you might not immediately opt to move into the apps and books world, but it's something that'll be available soon. Just a couple notes. When you, if you were using VPP and or DEP before, there was a step you went through in upgrading, preparing to upgrade, where you said, these are all of my VPP accounts and they're related. And it didn't really make sense as to why. That enabled this sort of capability where upon moving to the world of apps and books, you actually now get to say each of those disparate VPP tokens are now associated to a location. So if I had 10 different VPP accounts, I would create 10 different locations in Apple School Manager. Each of those tokens now becomes a location. And what's better is I have the ability to now move unassigned licenses back and forth between any of those locations. If you don't know what I'm talking about, there are a couple articles about preparing for Apple School Manager upgrade and doing the upgrade itself. There's a step with Apple Care. There are some options if you missed that the first time around as well that have been added into Apple School Manager, but that's the reason for the association, great enhancements to apps and books. So as I said, each token gets associated with a location. Excellent new user experience, by the way. If you've used the VPP store, you know how wonderful this is. Redeemable codes go away in this world, so it's all managed distribution. So it's user assignment or device assignment. Those tokens you have will continue to function. VPP tokens will continue to function even as you move over here. Of course, you want to make sure that they stay renewed. But it really helps to consolidate that content ownership of apps and books, moving away from the disparate tokens into a consolidated view of your content. So I mentioned the ability, Apple mentioned the ability to move license. Why would I want to do that? Maybe I have 2 tokens and I really wish I just had 1. Now I can say, take all of this available content from one location, move it to the other. That's the only one I want to use. I've now consolidated everything into one VPP token. Maybe I want to rearrange the way my content is organized. I can take any available licenses from one building's location, move it to a different building's location. I can actually shift those available licenses around. If content's assigned, it cannot be moved, so you would need to unassign it prior to moving it, and then you can reassign it from that new token or location. You might want to actually offload extra licenses. There's some customers who, the free app of the day, 25,000 copies. every day, 25,000 copies. We've got some customers with millions and millions of licenses. We try to performance tests and optimize for scale. Some of those tokens are really big, and they just take some time to chew through. And if you're not using all those licenses, that's actually kind of a negative thing. What's beautiful about this is I can say, let's take the extra 24,500 copies of this app, shuffle them off to this other token that's not tied to Jamp Pro. So you retain them, but you're not having to regularly sync those and true up against Jamp Pro. It's also the case that sometimes apps disappear, and they're always going to show up in your purchase history. And while we can do some things in Jamp Pro to make it better about ignoring an app that's no longer on the store, this also allows you to just say, hey, I don't use this one anymore, I don't need it, I don't want to deal with it, and it essentially shuffles it off into a holding location where it's not actually interacting with Jamp Pro anymore. So a number of different ways to do this. Again, if they're assigned licenses, you need to unassign them before you can move them. In the case of education, this just might be something you do over the summer. When all those devices get refreshed, you can reorganize. Of course, you can do it at any time, but that might be the most logical time to do it. So Apple School Manager gives us great ability to go into consolidated device management, and coming soon, a great experience for apps and books, all while the institution retains ownership. As people cycle through your organization, you don't need to worry about losing access to that purchased content or access to devices. Meanwhile, Jamp Pro continues to interact with the service as we know them today, VPP and DEP. So let's check the box there. Of course, we still have a lot of people involved, right? Each of those VPP tokens that are now in locations had an Apple ID tied to them. Those Apple IDs are now content managers. And what's beautiful is I can actually create a bunch of content managers, or I can give teacher roles the ability to have access to view content but not purchase content. I've got a lot more control with how I can grant delegated access for the individuals in my organization. I do want to mention, of course, there's already a story out there where a lot of customers are empowering education techs, or teachers, even student helpers, with some delegated access into Jamp Pro with limited permission sets. And actually coming soon, Dave Saltmarsh on our education evangelist team will be posting some resources, videos, and information about how to empower people with delegated access in Jamp Pro, specifically with an education focus. Keep an eye on the blog for that. I'm not sure exactly when it'll go live, but some really great stuff to get more people involved. But even beyond what we can control and enable, as I said, there's some great capabilities on the side of Apple School Manager, where I have a number of different roles, where I can give delegated access, not just by role type, but also granular control. So for instance, that instructor role can have customized privileges to view apps, but not purchase apps. It's all about getting people involved in the process. The less that has to cycle through a small population in IT, the more you can empower people, the more that you're able to scale and grow your deployments and create those experiences in the classroom. Same concept applies to device managers. There are people doing some of this today, but this really allows this concept of delegated management to go more mainstream by getting more people officially involved with that institutional level of control. So when it comes to managing that access, all the different people, Apple School Manager helps to solve for that challenge. Which brings us to student information system integration. These guys are complex. We've looked at trying to integrate in the past with Jamp Pro, and there's a lot of different APIs, even within any single SIS vendor. There's a lot of custom tables. It's an audacious task to integrate with any one SIS, and if you've used the SIS importer, you have some sense of that data. Many of you are probably familiar with just what that raw output looks like. And initially, when Apple School Manager came out, there was no SIS integration. It was a coming soon sort of functionality. Over the past year, Apple's added a number of direct API-level integrations, PowerSchool, Infinite Campus, SunGuard eSchool Plus, some great options to have this data automatically flow, and Jamp, any MDM vendor that wants to integrate can integrate directly with these different student information system data sources. And for those that don't have direct integration, Apple actually has talked a bit this week and have shared in other places that they are working with a number of student information systems. You might not be one of the big three, and that's fine. I don't mean to say those are the only ones that can do this. There are a lot of SIS vendors that have export templates built properly for Apple School Manager integration that can even automate the regular exports to your SFTP for the automated uploads. Of course, there's also a CSV upload button as well if you want to manually format, massage, or otherwise work with your data before uploading it. And I'll just say that this is an important step to get right. However you're tying in, test it, make sure it's working. Many schools, as I said, have custom data, custom tables. Every SIS is a little different. Getting that data mapped properly is essential. So for questions related to your specific implementation of your SIS vendor, contact your Apple support team. Jamp support may be able to give some information, but likely Apple's going to be the best place to go. And they've been, like I said, working with a lot of these SAS vendors. They've got resources to help you succeed, including some support they can provide in that workflow. And so we're going to check the box on SAS integration, which actually begets a whole bunch of other really exciting capabilities, because downstream, all of the subsequent activities are driven from the data about the users and the classes in your environment. The last thing I want to touch on when we talk about streamlined workflows relates to account management. So the first is account creation. The question came up earlier, so I'll add that every user that comes into Apple School Manager has a managed Apple ID. It's just a part of being a user in Apple School Manager. You don't have to use it. There are reasons you might need to use it, whether that's shared iPad or you want the ability to reset those passwords. But if students already have Apple IDs, staff already have Apple IDs, it's not mandatory to use those. Previously, though, there was an Apple ID for Students program. It was pretty challenging to adopt. It was really limited availability. What's beautiful about the account creation workflow with managed Apple IDs and Apple School Manager is how it puts all of the control in the hands of IT. So you have a lot more ability to support end-to-end this process, which is really important because you're talking about a big scale and you don't want to have so many external dependencies, for instance, parental approval with the creation of these accounts. Said you don't need to use managed Apple IDs. There are a couple reasons you might want to. Shared access, or shared iPad access, of course, would require the use of a managed Apple ID. That's what we actually use when we push down a configuration for a shared iPad. So the student just types in their password, but we know their managed Apple ID. Of course, if they're going to use any of the iCloud services or iTunes U, they would use their managed Apple ID. And any staff you want to get involved in device management or content management, they would use their managed Apple ID to log into Apple School Manager. There's also a lot of accounts you're dealing with, and so there's some mass actions built into Apple School Manager. Recent enhancements to the user experience of that more modern portal continue to get better, but you're getting more people involved. Things like setting the initial password for an Apple ID, for a managed Apple ID, or being able to reset a password for a student. If those things all need to funnel through to a small group in IT, that can chip away at a lot of your resources. So being able to delegate some of those day-to-day maintenance tasks, if you will, getting teachers involved, resolving those hiccups, getting the class back on track, getting the learning back on track. It's an important characteristic related to account management, and that's unique to managed Apple IDs. They also have some unique characteristics. Managed Apple IDs have a lot of things baked in that make them great for protecting your liability and your students' data and privacy. A number of things are restricted, so commerce is disabled, location services are disabled. The ability to use FaceTime and iMessage can actually be toggled on or off by role. So you might allow teachers to use FaceTime, but students cannot, for example. There's also a unique characteristic if you're doing user-based assignments, which are required for books, optional for apps. There's an acceptance process. You got to accept this invitation so you can get these apps for user-based assignments. If you're using Apple School Manager and managed Apple IDs, Jamp Pro can actually automatically accept that user-based invitation on behalf of your staff and students. So you can assign books directly to users' managed Apple IDs without any end-user interaction required, because the institution owns both the managed IDs and the content. So there's a compelling reason to do auto-accept with VPP assignments, user-based workflows. There are also some unique characteristics around account access. So there's an account inspection feature. So it'll automatically, or it'll temporarily create an Apple ID and password for an administrator to inspect activity. It's a 15-minute window and all these actions are audited. If you need to get into a device, log into iCloud, maybe you're trying to uncover some cyberbullying or other situations. Again, it's audited, but it allows IT to get into a shared iPad or log into an iCloud account as needed with an inspection capability. There's also an option where you can provide what is essentially a second factor code, a two-factor code, We generally would think of two-factor as a unique code generated every time I want to sign in with an Apple ID on a new device. You can provide students a static two-factor code that would allow them to log in with their managed ID on, say, their personal iPad or their home Mac. So you're able to provide that verification code as needed or as desired per user. So account creation is in IT's control without compromising security or privacy. So just now rattling through a few more things around workflows for integration with Jamp Pro. Check out last year's JNUC session. I did a more in-depth technical under the hood how it works. I just want to kind of touch on some of the highlights this year. We've got webinars and white papers as well. But just as a best practice, making a dedicated MDM server to tie back to Apple School Manager, you use DEP to integrate. Excuse me. And the risk of using that DEP MDM server for device management as well is those might get modified or deleted. And if you have one dedicated just for your Apple School Manager sync, that token is otherwise not used, and you reduce the risk of that connection being terminated. You can schedule the sync and interval. And then just a note, if you've got a lot of data, that sync may be still chugging under the hood, and until that first sync completes, you're not able to start importing users or classes. A few different ways you can slice and dice the imports once you have it tied into Jamp Pro. So you can import classes which automatically bring the users within those classes. Or perhaps you want to import classes or users first and then later classes. We do deduplicating. We use some really fancy logic and calculate the Levenstein distance of matching to determine the best user record matching between Apple School Manager and Jamp Pro. One of our engineers taught me that. It's a lovely matching logic that we use. Of course, the best criteria for matching requires less of that logic, and that's saying this field from Apple School Manager exactly matches this field from a user in Jamp Pro. Maybe that's a student ID number or a username, or starts with if the managed Apple IDs are formulated in a way. There are other matching criteria like contains or ends with that aren't as performant and can have some performance implications at scale. The other thing I'll mention about classes is if you import a class and then a student's added to that class in a few weeks, that class roster automatically imports any new users. So the benefit of importing classes is it'll bring any user changes along with it as well. Touched on this more last year, but just so you're aware, once you enable education support, any classes in Jamp Pro, those devices, those users automatically have education profiles created, and that's what creates the relationship between all of the users, teachers, and classes. You need to have a username on those devices. Some people doing cart-based workflows didn't have a username filled out. That's a required piece of information for an education profile, so just make sure that's there. And this profile is generated uniquely and dynamically, and ongoing maintenance of this profile is done, which means it's done under the hood. It's just too much for something to be manually managed. It keeps updating automatically. Classroom app is another huge aspect of Apple in the classroom. Turns your iPad into the most powerful teaching assistant, helps the teachers focus students on learning in the classroom. There are a number of capabilities. Many of you hopefully have seen Classroom. The biggest thing that I hope to do today is to demystify some of the dependencies and requirements around Classroom. There's a lot of things people want to do with this education solution in the classroom, and sometimes there are misconceptions around what requires Apple School Manager, what doesn't, what needs managed Apple IDs, what doesn't. So we'll talk more about that, but a number of compelling in-classroom experiences, and there's actually one more, and that's Classroom 2.0 now supports using Classroom app without complex MDM integration. Maybe that's a BYO model, an after-school program, or using Jamp Now. And so I just want to clarify that requirement, because this is something that's relatively new. Teachers drive the class creation. It's all by proximity. Users can join using settings on their iPad. Users can leave. They can opt out. So it's a different experience than you know with Classroom app. But it is an option if you don't have education support enabled or you don't want a more complex integration, smaller proof of concept, getting Classroom off the ground. So like I said, there's just one more permutation of this that can lead to some confusion in deploying Classroom. I'm actually going to tweet this out after because hopefully it's a helpful reference. But when you think about what doesn't require any complex MDM support, when you think about what needs Jamp Pro but doesn't need Apple School Manager, and when you think about what would Apple School Manager get me? What would the next level of experiences be? This is just a bit of a rubric. You know, teachers love rubrics. This is the IT admin rubric of what you can do with the teacher-created classes, what requires Apple School Manager. So I won't go into great length. Like I said, I'll share this out on Twitter afterwards, but it's helpful to understand what is the experience you're trying to create, and is Apple School Manager helpful to that end? Aside from the benefits of deployment programs, do I need managed Apple IDs? If you want to do shared iPad, yeah, you need managed Apple IDs and you need DEP. But if you just want to be able to have that user interaction, maybe you don't need Apple School Manager at all. Maybe you just have classes even coming from the SIS importer or manually created. Classroom app itself, teacher device doesn't need to be supervised, doesn't require any special configuration. It's all derived from that education profiler from Proximity. 4th generation or later, or iPad mini 2 or later, iOS 10.3. This goes back about 5 years with hardware, so pretty relaxed requirements there. If you're doing IT managed classes, what we've known for the last year and a half, that's Jamp Pro 9.9 or later, works with both one-to-one and shared iPad. And then if you want to do these teacher-created classes, Classroom 2.0 or later, no MDM support required. I also want to mention Apple TV in the classroom. AirPlay is a really compelling set of functionality. There's been a bunch of new management capabilities as well, including device enrollment program, app distribution, single app mode, et cetera. And I just actually want to show this here because it can't be understated the significance of reducing the friction to deploying Apple TV in education or in any industry. So with power, Ethernet, and your display connected, Apple TV automatically detects the network, automatically advances, no Siri remote required, and then can automatically launch an enterprise app. In the case here, we're seeing a lot of custom apps being built. We saw one shared by SIP in the main keynote. This is actually a commercially available solution, something built by Tightrope Media Systems Carousel Player, if you're familiar with it. It's actually driving some of the signage out in the lobby. I would encourage you to check some of these solutions out. There's some really compelling experiences around putting those displays to work, whether that's streaming morning announcements, getting that lunch menu up on the right displays, emergency notification integration. Oh, by the way, it's also an AirPlay display. So some really exciting things going on with Apple TV. And that's just a part of what's been going on in education over the last year. A lot of enhancements of class name formatting, lost mode sounds from Apple, which was a really big deal in education, and continued enhancement of the roster data, performance improvements. There's a lot going on. So I've talked at you a lot about tech and tools, but ultimately it's in support of getting Apple in the classroom. And we build these things to focus on student learning, to focus on teacher effectiveness, to bring that experience to the classroom. And I want to invite Sam up, who's going to give you a bit more of a glimpse into what it is we're actually trying to achieve, these tools helping us to do so. So, Sam, welcome up.
Great. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Sam. This is my 4th JNUC, my 3rd as a Jamf employee. First time presenting, though, so when they give you one of these clickers, you know you're at an actual conference giving an actual presentation, so thank you very much. Very quickly, a little bit about me. My job title at Jamf is I'm an evangelist. I'm on one of the coolest teams at Jamf. Shout out to the other evangelists in the corner. Our job is to get people excited about technology. We do that in education, both through technology as well as experiences that we can build for folks. So you've heard today about a lot of device management, about a lot of capabilities with MDM. I think it's important to realize, especially in the folks that we serve in education, our customers are students, and it's teachers, and it's about what more can we build for them? How can we help them experience new things so that they can grow beyond what they came into our classrooms with? So you buy iPads, you have Jamf, but there's a lot more that Apple offers, and it's all part of that package. When we talk about going all in with Apple in the classroom, your iPad purchases subsidize a lot of other technologies and a lot of resources and tools. I want to make sure that you know about those and that you can bring those back to your districts, to your students, and to your teachers so that we can do more with this technology that we already have in place. So to start off, I want to talk about iTunes U. When schools talk about going all in with iPad, we're generally talking about content creation. We're talking about experiences on the iPad. But one thing that I see schools miss quite frequently is the LMS. So we need a learning management system that is fully capable of 100% iPad work. So Apple's iTunes U is a fantastic option, and with some of the new integration to Apple School Manager, with permissions and roles being managed in that central console, this is a really fantastic way for your teachers to build experiences with apps, materials. It has a built-in grade book. It allows teachers to facilitate conversations and discussions with either the entire class or one-on-one with a student. So it's a fantastic program. It comes at no cost, and it integrates with a lot of tools that you already use, most specifically Apple School Manager. So there's some really great things to be had there. Recent updates to iTunes U. In the past year, we've moved to a 100% document and assignment round trip. That's a phrase that we hear a lot in education. How do you get the material out? How does the student submit that material? How does the teacher facilitate or grade or annotate that? And how do we get it back to the student? So what's really great is now we can do that 100% in iTunes U. You can also see when students have viewed or completed assignments, and you can remind them when assignments are due. So more capabilities are being built into iTunes U than ever before. You may have seen a quick update a few months back. What Apple did is they removed collections from iTunes U. And some folks had some opinions on this, but realistically what I think this is Apple streamlining iTunes U to be really a product for schools. It's no longer really intended to be a mass consumption device for the collections that were previously available. Those have moved to the podcast app. So again, we're seeing a streamlined product being developed specifically for schools. And that's the logo, if you didn't know it. So next up is iWork and Apple Pencil. So Apple's iWork applications have gotten some major updates in the past year that make it a really great fit for the classroom. So just over a year ago, Apple added the ability to collaborate with other students in real time across any platform that iWork works on. So what that means is iOS, means macOS, and modern browsers on non-Apple devices. So this is a far better experience than other strictly web-based document programs that you may be used to. And let's keep in mind, Apple supports all the other great things that they do on their iOS devices. So rich media support, support for drag and drop across apps, the accessibility options that Apple's known for, and quite a bit more. So really fantastic things, continues to be a great product, gets even better. And then from a deployment scenario, Apple simplified things quite a bit. If you've purchased iPads in the past, you know sometimes they come preloaded with these iWork applications, and there was a very cumbersome license redemption process where you'd have to fill out a form, what purchase order was used, and eventually Apple would grant you VPP licenses for those applications. So now, iWork is free through VPP, and we've even done some things with our Make Managed option in Jamf to make sure that you can swap out those the preloaded apps with the ones that you actually have VPP redemption options for. So Apple Pencil, I'm very excited about. There's nothing more synonymous with schools than pencils. So we heard on keynote day 2 about Maryville University. This is going to be a theme that I think we see a lot of coming up in the future. It's a really great tool for teachers to grade, students to create digitally and take notes. And at Maryville University, any digital art student is being provided an iPad Pro with an Apple Pencil. And so that's a really great experience, not just for those digital art students, but for other students as well. So there's cost savings to be had. We're going to start teaching more modern digital art workflows. If you haven't explored some of the digital art apps on iPad, they're phenomenal. And when you compare them to traditional costs of digital art software on a Mac, it's incredible. So really great things there. And another, you may feel like this is a small addition, but it's actually quite big. In both the iOS and the macOS applications of iWork, we've now added the ability to drop shapes that Apple has provided directly into documents. They've got great alpha, so transparent backgrounds. You can change the colors. But what this does is it allows students to stay natively within the apps. So just think about the inverse. In the past, if a student wanted to find a globe, we'd have to go to a browser, we'd have to go to Google image search, and students are going to spend a lot of time and a lot of cycles doing something that Apple has now provided for us. So you can quickly search through it, drop them in, and it's pretty fantastic. Again, what Apple's doing is creating a better native experience within their applications. All right, in the Apple Teacher Program. Just a quick show of hands, does anyone have Apple teachers in their school? Anyone that's gone through the Apple Teacher Program? I see a few hands. Okay, great. This is big. Apple has done a lot over the course of the last year, creating new hardware, new software, new deployment tools. But honestly, I think the feather in their cap is teacher enablement resources. So let's talk through about a few of them. The Apple Teacher Program is a module-based training course that teachers can go through. It's badge-based learning. So it's a really great experience. You log in, you choose your platform. Is that macOS, is it iOS? And you can get certified on Apple's native applications. So finding new creative ways to use Pages, Keynote, Numbers, and now Apple's even added a coding track. We're going to talk coding a little bit more in depth later on. But it's self-paced. And Apple also provides resources for teachers that need to do this on their own. And they also offer collateral for schools that want to do this school-wide or district-wide. And there's even third parties that will come in and offer the training for you. Little shout out to Berwyn South, a great customer of Jamps, but they were also featured on Apple.com as a district that has truly embraced the Apple Teacher Program. So if you're here, thank you. Really exciting stuff. And beyond just being a training program, on the left side there, you're seeing the Apple Teacher District Guide that gives good recommendations on how much time do you need to budget for the kickoff, how do you get people excited about it, and how do you make sure that education continues on. For schools that offer continuing education credits, there are lots of ways to wrap this in, so teachers are incentivized to go through these programs on their own. And hashtag Apple Teacher is something that I check out daily. But this is a fantastic community of folks that are really pushing the boundaries of what's possible in the classroom. To compare this to ADE, or Apple Distinguished Educator, still a fantastic program, this is more accessible to more folks, so definitely check it out. All right. Everyone can code. This is something that I'm personally working on myself. Being on the evangelism team, I don't get to get quite into tech as much as I used to, but Swift Playgrounds has enabled me to really continue my education on programming and a whole lot more. So Apple created this Everyone Can Code initiative to help schools and teachers feel 100% comfortable and supported when diving into new topics like coding. In the types of materials that they created, we've got teacher guides that are really broken out into very specific levels. There are textbooks available for students in high school and college. And Apple actually recommends a few applications for grades as low as kindergarten. I'm going to show you exactly that in a second. But between all that, Swift Playgrounds, which has recently implemented integrations with Sphero and a few other robotics companies. So we can now take this digital experience and bring it to the real world with robotics without having to use those specific applications. So we're taking the Swift language, applying that to real-life robotics, and it's a really fantastic experience. And before I bring up the next thing, please don't let anyone ever roll their eyes at teaching programming concepts to students as young as kindergarten. And the reason I say that is, think about this. We teach language in school. We teach English. But we don't expect all of our students to become authors. We teach language because that's how we communicate as a society, and as technology becomes more and more ingrained in how we communicate and how we work, it's important for students to realize that's not magic behind the scenes, that's STEM at work. So programming concepts really should be taught at as young of an age as comfortable, because it's a different world that students are growing up in. So one of my favorite documents by Apple is the Everyone Can Code curriculum. What this does is it takes all of those resources that Apple has offered, and it breaks it down by grade, and it tells you exactly how much time should be expected for students to work through some of this. So I'm going to zoom in here. Hopefully you can see that. Kindergarten through second grade. Apple is suggesting CodeSpark Academy, a fantastic app, as well as Tinkerspace Cadet. And that's not just the app. They're actually telling you the module that they expect someone of these grade levels to be able to work through. And as you can see on the screen, we've got learning materials, which are apps and resources for students. The support resources, so that's the document that your teacher or whoever's facilitating coding should be comfortable with. And for a kindergartner or through second grader, Apple is suggesting 30 hours of curriculum time to be able to successfully move through all that. And as we scroll through here, you'll also see that high school and college are listed as well. Apple has done some amazing things, specifically in Texas, Austin, with community colleges, integrating Swift and programming concepts into curriculum. So this is not a PR play by Apple. These are true, real resources that you can bring back to your districts and, again, provide more experiences for students. Another great thing is Apple has published curriculum alignment with the CSTA, Computer Science Standards for Level 2. So if you're in curriculum or you understand some of that, or even if you don't, these are materials that show specifically how what we're teaching directly applies to the curriculum that we should be teaching our students. All right. And the last two things I want to discuss, I am a former Apple retail employee, proudly, and one of my favorite things were field trips to the Apple Store. So if you go on, I believe it's apple.com/retail/field trip, you can set up a time, you tell Apple exactly how many students you're going to have, what concepts you'd like to learn, whether that's digital creation, whether that's programming, quite a bit, and they will contact you with a date and a time that you can bring your class to the Apple Store and experience this, guided by the creatives and other folks at the Apple Store. So if you haven't done that, certainly check it out. Like I said, it was really heartwarming to see that, and Apple will continue to offer those experiences in their spaces. Another thing to mention, just getting kicked off here in the United States, is Teacher Tuesdays at Apple. Apple has changed a little bit of how they offer webinars and resources within the store. And Teacher Tuesdays are being run at some of their flagship stores. So that's a place where you can send teachers to learn more about all of these concepts that we've talked about today. And the last thing is virtual field trips. Now, a lot of the content that I'm presenting today is going to be posted in an article that I've written called Thinking Holistically About iPad Deployments. And there will be links to all of this stuff in there. But virtual field trips are collections of content. That's apps, that's videos, that's resources that can dive into everything from visiting the pyramids of Giza, a rainforest. There's just an incredible amount of content that's been pre-packaged and pre-created for your teachers to instantly deploy in their classroom. So, I know Michael's talked a lot about tech. I've talked a lot about things that are not tech. But it's important to realize to be truly successful and to help your students become successful does require that marriage of the two. So whether that's you working with directors of instruction, curriculum, academics, let's make sure that we bridge the gap between IT and the folks that are delivering these experiences to students to make sure we give them everything that they need. All right, Michael.
Thank you, Sam. Appreciate it. So we're at time here. I'll recap. We talked about Jamp Pro and the way that this drives the experiences in the classroom. Apple School Manager bringing a modern deployment program experience to IT administrators, and of course how the classroom app provides the best teaching assistant experience so that we can create the experiences that Sam showed. There's a lot to take in here. We're at time, so I want to say thank you. And if you want to linger for questions, I'll stay up here. A lot of the questions might be common and interesting to the group. Otherwise, it's lunchtime, so thank you very much for your attention. Have a great rest of the day. If you do have questions, you're welcome to head up to the microphones. We'll linger for a few.
How you doing?
Yeah.
Hopefully it's a question and not just a product suggestion.
Yeah.
But my name's Justin Hayes, and I'm the technology director for Justin Siena High School in Napa, California, and I lost my voice because it was too wild of a party last night. Anyway, so we went with Apple School Manager and moved to managed IDs this year, and the teachers are using the classroom app, and it's a game changer. They love it. It's great and made me look really good. But that being said, the other advantage to having the managed Apple IDs for us was with book deployment, because in the past, through the JSS, it would have to send a VPP invitation that we would rely on the students to open up self-service to accept that. And now with this managed IDs, it's an auto-accept. So that made things a lot easier. The issue with us, with those managed Apple IDs is, and I guess I need maybe some wisdom as far as how to enforce that. We have advisory groups broken up into 10 to 15 students for every student in the school. And during enrollment, we gave everyone their managed Apple IDs, and just about everybody was able to do it. But as you know, there are some students that just need a little extra help, or they just don't do what they're supposed to do. And so they would log in with a personal Apple ID, and we didn't really have a way to know which Apple ID they used. And so we had many students that didn't get their book for a month after school started. the students came back in, we check it out, we're like, hey, you didn't log in with your managed Apple ID, and now your iPad's bound to another Apple ID and you've gone into the App Store. Now we have to wait 90 days before we can do anything with this iPad, and we try to switch it back and because of that Apple limitation, and bring a spare iPad. So I guess I'm not sure, that was a problem for us as far as wanting to buy more books. Overall, the process was relatively easy, but it didn't help us when history teachers were like, why don't my kids have their books?
Yeah.
So
it's a valid point, and I don't have a great, simple, elegant solution for you. I know that you'll get some indication based on like auto-accept invitation failures, which devices don't have managed Apple IDs on them. Of course, you can prevent account creation, but that isn't really what you want to do either. I know there are 90-day limitations around switching back and forth and back and forth. Is it the case we don't need to go into this here. I know there's an issue where like if you switch once, you can't switch again for 90 days. I'm not aware of a limitation where on logging in, you're prevented from changing for 90 days. That could have changed.
Yes, so those who came to us for help after initially not being able to retrieve their content, it was fine. But those who tried to have their parents help them or they went back and forth, it was not, it was a problem.
Unfortunately, we don't have great control over inspecting Apple IDs or pre-populating those, so there's not a great technology solution there. It's a valid request that likely would require more assistance from Apple or other sorts of faculty-driven activities. Unfortunately, there's not a great tech solution for that one.
It'd be great if they just removed that limitation for DEP enrolled devices in education.
Yeah, I mean, maybe on enrollment, you restrict some of that, hide the App Store so there's not a compelling reason for them to try to log into the App Store.
We did do that.
So they could still go into settings, yeah.
And I got one other question.
Sure.
So with Bluetooth, and I know this is on the forums,
yeah.
But is there any word on whether we'll be able to control separately, being able to enable it or disable it, or allow them to pair devices but not turn it off?
Yeah, so the question relates, I imagine, to Classroom app.
That's
and the
right.
requirement for Bluetooth and Wi-Fi to use Classroom app.
Yep.
Without any Bluetooth management, it was a big problem where students would just turn off Bluetooth and then they go offline in Classroom.
Yeah.
So then Apple came back and said, we'll let you manage or lock Bluetooth. Of course, it's not setting the value, it's locking its current value. So make sure you do it right away where it's defaulting to on at enrollment.
Exactly.
Then students got clever because they're great quality assurance. We should hire some of these guys to find product issues for us.
Absolutely.
They'll then go and turn on airplane mode, which disables radios, and then turn back on Wi-Fi. Apple has shared in the past that mucking too much with radios, like for instance, managing them to stay on. People still take planes, and the Federal Aviation Administration has some pretty strict requirements for them and their hardware. So Apple's well aware, and I'd encourage you to file the feedback. I'm sure they've heard it, but the data point helps. I'm not aware of what their plans are. They know that the community wants them to do more, but that's again an intervention point on the teacher, probably to say, Michael, you're doing it again. Come on, get on track. But it is a limitation.
That's exactly what we're doing. We're just, Thank you very much.
Cool, thanks. Is there another question over here?
Yeah. Apple I'm with the Smithsonian, and Apple considers us a business. So when we tried to go ahead to set up our DEP program and VPP program, you either could pick a business or education, and they decided we fit more into the business area. So a lot of the features you were talking about with being able to consolidate tokens sounds pretty appealing to us, because we have a few tokens now across different VPP programs or VPP accounts that would be nice to consolidate. And so do you need the Apple School Manager program available in order to consolidate? And is it available to people that are not considered, that are not in the EDU section of the DEP?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a popular question. Today, nobody has the ability to do the transfer licenses, but it's coming soon to education customers with Apple School Manager. If you were here for the previous session, Jeremy Butcher from Apple Worldwide Product Marketing indicated that Apple School Manager is a more modern framework upon which they're building their deployment programs, and that they hope to bring those benefits to all customers in the future. Of course, Apple doesn't usually speak in terms of timelines, so I don't know exactly what or exactly when. But I can validate that what we've seen is an iteration of those APIs for the education integrations that haven't necessarily taken place on the commercial platform. As Jeremy said, they're investing in this new framework. So I'm optimistic that he's expressed that's their thinking as well, but I don't know exact timing. That would be a requirement to be able to do things like transferring the licenses between locations.
So you're saying that Apple School Manager is only available to
Education customers.
education, right?
Yes.
Okay. Great.
Empty microphones. We'll let everyone get to lunch. Thank you very much. Have a good day.